Imagine waking up in 1942 to the sound of air raid sirens at 6 a.m. Knowing your breakfast would be 2 slices of bread with a thin scrape of butter. If you were lucky enough to have saved your ration stamps. Welcome, dear dreamer, this is Toro, and tonight we travel softly through time, floating back to the year 1942. A year suspended between hardship and hope, when the rhythm of life continued, even as the world held its breath. It was a year of rationed sugar and shared laughter, of letters written by lamplight, and of courage stitched quietly into everyday fabric. Imagine yourself in a small kitchen where tea is steeping, a radio murmurs faintly, and the calendar reads February 1942. Outside, bicycles hum along cobblestone streets. Somewhere, a baby laughs for the first time. Somewhere else, someone hums a lullaby to ease the night. In every corner of the world, the same moon rose, pale and tender, over cities and fields, over soldiers and farmers, over children who dreamed of better days. Tonight, we will wander gently through that year. We'll visit the homes, the songs, the inventions, and the quiet moments that made 1942 both fragile and full of light. So settle back, breathe slowly, and let the hum of history guide you into calm. World events. The year 1942 was the world's deep breath, drawn in the middle of a storm. Across oceans and continents, nations continued their struggle in the Second World War. Yet even in those shadowed days, small acts of humanity glowed quietly. In January, global leaders met in Washington, signing the Declaration of the United Nations, a promise of shared resolve. Though the world was divided by battle, this gesture hinted at the cooperation that would one day rebuild peace. In Asia, the Pacific Ocean became a restless stage. Battles were fought upon its blue expanse, and names like Midway and Guadalcanal would echo softly through history books. Yet in the midst of military maneuvers, life along the coasts persisted, fishermen still cast their nets, families tended small gardens, and radio operators shared songs between transmissions. In Europe, cities like London and Leningrad endured long nights of uncertainty. People wrapped themselves in blankets and determination, singing softly while distant skies glowed. In cafes that still opened, tea was poured, and the warmth of company was its own act of defiance. Meanwhile, in the vast lands of North America, industry thrummed like a steady drumbeat. Factories turned out planes, ships, and uniforms, and for the first time, women in great numbers filled these roles. Rosie the Riveter, as she came to be called, became a symbol of quiet strength, sleeves rolled up, eyes focused, her work steady as dawn. Far to the south, in Africa and the Middle East, communities adjusted to new realities. Caravans still crossed deserts, harvests still came in, and songs still rose beneath starry skies. And in the Pacific Islands, life changed overnight, yet even there, people found ways to keep old traditions alive, the weaving of mats, the passing of stories, the calling of waves to the shore. Through all of it, 1942 whispered one truth: humanity endured, not through grand speeches, but through simple acts of care. One story that shaped 1942, the turning tide at Midway. Let's pause and drift closer to one moment where the ocean itself seemed to hold its breath. It was early June, on the wide blue canvas of the Pacific Ocean, near a small coral atoll called Midway. The sun rose over waters dotted with aircraft carriers and clouds of sea mist. The world didn't yet know it, but what would happen here would mark a subtle turn in the tide. Far above the waves, pilots navigated by the glint of sunlight, radios crackling with short, tense phrases. Yet below, in ships and bunkers, men passed coffee cups, wrote letters home, and shared brief jokes. Humanity existed even within strategy, a heartbeat beneath the noise. The Battle of Midway, as history would call it, was not just a clash of machines. It was a test of endurance, intelligence, and trust in signals unseen. when the skies finally cleared, for Japanese carriers had been lost, shifting the balance of the Pacific conflict. But beyond the maps and figures, the true story lived in quiet aftermaths, sailors watching the sea's calm return, birds settling again on waves, and news traveling across the world, first as whispers, then as cautious relief. People at home marked the moment without fanfare. A mother might have smiled at the radio, whispering, "Maybe now, it will start to end." And then she would go on washing dishes, the suds reflecting the evening light. The turning tide of 1942 wasn't only military, it was emotional. It showed the first faint promise that someday, peace would find its way back. Daily life around the world. To live in 1942 was to live with resourcefulness and hope tucked neatly between routines. In Britain, ration books were kept beside teacups. Housewives planned meals carefully, stretching a week's butter into something almost miraculous. Carrots were used in cakes to sweeten them naturally. Children learned to knit, making scarves for the men overseas. Across America, victory gardens sprouted behind homes and in city parks. Families grew beans, lettuce, and tomatoes, proudly labeling their gardens with hand-painted signs. Neighbors shared sugar coupons and laughter in equal measure. In France, people whispered softly in candlelit apartments. Bread was precious, and radio broadcasts carried coded messages through the airwaves. Yet there was beauty, too. People still danced in quiet halls, musicians played violins in cellars, and friendships deepened in secrecy and trust. Meanwhile, in Japan, families gathered for evening meals of rice and miso soup, bowing their heads before eating. School children carried small flags to ceremonies, while mothers mended clothes carefully, thread by thread. In rural India, the monsoon rains came as they always had, filling the fields with the scent of wet earth. Farmers and labourers continued their days under the same sun that shone across distant continents. The world in 1942 may have been shadowed, but it pulsed with gentle life, the smell of fresh bread somewhere, a song hummed softly, a letter slipped into an envelope. Fashion reflected practicality, wool coats, sturdy shoes, recycled fabrics. Men wore uniforms, but also work overalls and hats. Women tied hair with scarves, sleeves rolled for labor, lipstick saved for special moments. Evenings were for radio, programs like Fibber McGee and Molly, BBC News, or Glenn Miller's orchestra. The sound of swing-filled kitchens and living rooms alike, a reminder that music could lift even the heaviest hearts. Somewhere, a record spun and someone danced slowly, eyes closed, body swaying, the war forgotten for a song's length. Science, inventions, and technology. Even as resources grew scarce, 1942 saw remarkable ingenuity. In medicine, penicillin began saving lives on a scale never before seen. First discovered earlier, it now reached soldiers and hospitals, turning infection from a death sentence into a treatable wound. Quietly, the world's first antibiotic revolution had begun. Aircraft grew faster and more efficient. Engineers tested radar systems, invisible waves that could see where eyes could not. These invisible guardians became lifelines in fog and night. In America, a secret scientific effort began, known only to a few, the Manhattan Project. It was the seed of atomic power, though the world would not yet grasp its weight. For now, it was simply a collection of chalkboards, calculations, and curious minds. Everyday innovation blossomed, too. Nylon stockings returned briefly to store shelves, before being redirected to parachutes. People repaired, reused, and repurposed everything. Tin cans became toy parts, old dresses became curtains. Technology of communication improved, with more compact radios and typewriters connecting people across continents. Letters traveled faster, often carried by military postplanes, crossing oceans filled with quiet hope. Even amid global tension, humanity's curiosity refused to sleep. Science, in its purest form, was still an act of faith in the future. Culture and the arts. Even in 1942, beauty insisted on existing. Cinema was a sanctuary. People escaped to darkened theaters to watch Casablanca, Bambi, and Mrs. Miniver. On screens, love endured, friendship triumphed, and courage was gentle. The flicker of light across faces reminded audiences that stories could keep them human. Music carried the world through long nights. Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade floated through radios. Vera Lynn's voice, soft, reassuring, sang, "We'll meet again." It became not just a song, but a promise. Writers worked quietly. Albert Camus published The Stranger in occupied France, and Across the Sea, John Steinbeck released The Moon is Down, offering quiet defiance wrapped in prose. Painters turned to muted tones, watercolor scenes of rooftops, fields, and mothers by windows. Beauty leaned inward, reflective, intimate. Sports continued in adapted ways, local baseball and football leagues filled with amateurs, children playing in parks, and communities cheering for distraction. And in moments between curfews, people created embroidery, sketches, poetry scribbled on paper margins. The arts of 1942 were not loud, they were whispered forms of resilience. Media and headlines. In 1942, most people met the world through the radio or the printed page. Newspapers arrived each morning with smudged ink and earnest headlines. In the United States, the New York Times spoke of Allied advances and ration guidelines updated. In Britain, the Times reminded readers to keep calm and carry on, while light-hearted columns printed recipes for eggless cakes. Magazines such as Life offered photos of smiling workers, new aircraft, and families keeping courage alive. Typical prices fluttered across pages. A loaf of bread, 9 cents. A postage stamp, 3 cents. A movie ticket, 30 cents. Gasoline, 20 cents per gallon. If you could get a coupon. Advertisements encouraged thrift, make do and mend, grow your own, and save scrap for victory. Yet some still promised glamour, soft perfume ads, illustrated lipstick, and sparkling dresses that few could buy, but everyone could imagine. Radio broadcasters read nightly bulletins, voices calm and firm. And when the news ended, music often followed, a reminder that the night, at least, was still gentle. People born and people died this year. 1942 quietly welcomed new lives and said farewell to others who had shaped earlier eras. Among those born were Paul McCartney, future Beatle and songwriter of peace and love. Stephen Hawking, who would one day explore the universe's mysteries. Harrison Ford, future storyteller of the skies and screens. Aretha Franklin, whose voice would lift hearts across generations. Jimi Hendrix, destined to reinvent the sound of the guitar. And among those who left the world in 1942, Carlton Coon, pioneering anthropologist. Caroline Otero, famed dancer and courtesan of the Belle Epoque. Jean Giraudoux, French playwright who wrote of humanity's contradictions. Lucy Maud Montgomery, beloved author of Anne of Green Gables, whose gentle imagination continued to comfort readers long after her passing. Each life, entering or leaving, added a quiet thread to the vast tapestry of time. As 1942 drew to its close, snow fell over Europe, rain misted across Asia, and the Pacific shimmered under an uncertain peace. The world was weary, yet steadfast. In living rooms and barracks alike, people marked the holidays with simplicity. A single candle, a shared loaf of bread, a song hummed near the fire. There was less abundance, but perhaps more meaning. Hope became something small and luminous, like a match in a cold room, cherished all the more for its fragility. Letters from afar spoke of survival, and every reunion, even imagined, felt like victory. Children born that year learned their first words to the sound of radio reports, but also lullabies sung with love. And in the hearts of millions, an idea began to grow, that someday, the war would end, and the world would have to learn tenderness again. As the final hours of 1942 slipped quietly into 1943, church bells rang faintly through fog and frost. The sound carried far, over rivers, over seas, into dreams. And though the night was long, it was no longer endless. The horizon had begun to pale. Thank you, dear listener, for journeying with me through the gentle memory of 1942. If this story has brought you calm, or painted a picture of humanity's quiet endurance, I invite you to rest here a while longer. Please, if you wish, leave a soft like, or subscribe, so that together we can wander through history's twilight, one peaceful year at a time. Next time, we'll drift into another year, new voices, new inventions, new dreams rising through the dusk. Until then, may your night be gentle, your thoughts light, and your dreams full of calm horizons. Good night, from Toro's History Lullabies.